Welcome back to the sculpture, and today we are going to be working and focusing on smaller portions. Today we're definitely going to concentrate a little bit on the head. I think when I'm at this point where I have most of my gestures, and one thing that is happening is that the arms are too long, but it's really kind of like an optical illusion. You do want to take measurements from arm to arm, make sure that the bony points are in the right place. At this point, it's very important to have a good understanding of the skeleton, not just the muscles on top of the figure. So one of the things you need to do is, for example, there is this bony landmark that you have on people. It's called the acromion process. And if you don't know what it is, I would suggest getting a small book of anatomy and looking over. It's really like the acromion is where the humerus, the scapula, and the clavicle meet. That's why it's a process. It's like a multi-bone sort of connection. But what that means as an artist is that that's a very important landmark because you can see it in the figure. You can see exactly all the bones that are showing. But for a sculptor, it's important because that's where you should be taking measurements. So if you're working bigger, you can use calipers, or you can even use those protractors that you can use for drafting. What I have here is just a very flat stick. Make sure that it's nice and level, it's not bent. And this is the acromion here, and I'm going to measure it to the elbow or the old cranium. So I'm going to take that measurement about that, and I'm going to take it here and I'm going to compare it. And you kind of want to do this throughout. So my elbow here needs to come up a little bit. So the important thing is to look for bony landmarks, because the bony landmarks don't really change very much. But when you have models that have a lot of muscle, if you take measurements directly from the muscles, the visual aspect of the muscles, you're going to screw up because different models, different people have different muscle mass. That is why the bones are much more important to the sculptor than the muscles, even though muscles are extremely important. But what I find is that people often neglect the bony structure underneath. That's why you have a lot of sculptors start out by building the skeleton first, or the skull first, and then they add the muscles on top and then the skin. I usually don't go that far, but I do try and sculpt the bones. So I'll do a very rudimentary skull or very rudimentary skeleton, but I always try and find where the skeleton is, because it really reveals the form. So in this session, what I'm going to be doing is working on the face, taking measurements, and just keep working. As I move the sculpture around, you can kind of see what's happening. It's starting to develop what I want. So I did include a little bit of the hair, and surprisingly, I need to add more clay to the hair because the hair, there's so much happening. And that's something that I do appreciate about models that have less hair. They put it in a ponytail, tied up. It's a whole lot less clay. When you add the hair, it serves as two purposes. Because she has a very thin neck, as most female models do, very thin, narrow, even male models with very thick necks. It's still very strange because to support the weight of a head, a wet clay, it's pretty dense, it's pretty heavy, and the neck is very thin, no matter whose it is, that it could break off if you don't have an armature inside, as I don't for this. So the hair serves as another purpose in sculptures, that it is an armature connecting the neck to the head to the back. That way it's going to be much stronger. And this is something that you see in antique sculptures, is that when you're looking at antique sculptures, they generally have some sort of prop in order to strengthen that sculpture. For example, if it's a standing figure, you might see like a tree trunk coming up to the thigh. And what that is, it's just a structural support for the sculpture, and it really helps it. And it's just not there for iconography. It's there to support the marble or whatever medium it is. So let's keep working on the face. And you can see I am building a little bit. I added the hair, and now we're going to give it a little bit more of an unique look. One of the things that you should consider is using a bristle brush like this to get into the corners. So as you're refining the head, remember I already put all my geometry in the head. I don't have quite the likeness, but a lot of times when you're working with a figure sculpture, you want to finish these things, but often don't rush to, use a brush. But I use a brush midway and then I refine it later on. But because I can't get to the little bits in the eyes, it helps to have something like this to kind of push the clay around. Another thing that I don't like is this bridge right here. Actually, her bridge is right above, so I'm going to push this down. That's going to create the nose a little bit higher so it's not as pudgy. So take my hand, kind of push it down, and this is when the brush comes in like a nice bristle brush. You get it wet and you start to curve the nose a bit. Then you take the bristle and kind of move it into the cheek. So move that into the cheek. Just kind of blend it. And her nose is kind of moving a bit, so just by pushing it, you have to make sure that it's perfect. And now at this point, this part, you need to kind of blend it so it doesn't have like a very intense superciliary arch. Good, make it like that. Okay, so at this point I'm just going to blend it a little bit. So I don't want like it. This little edge here has to be a lot softer. And I believe it has to be just a little bit higher. So I'm just going to take a little bit of clay and add just a little, like that. And there's a lot of geometry here because, so you have the eyebrow and you have like the glabella, which is in the middle. And then you have the other eyebrow. And then you have the orbicularis oculi here. So that's the eyebrow. So sometimes I do like to take this tool and just draw in some things to help me later on. So at the bottom of the eye, I might make a very thin depression like that. And then eventually I'll start to bring it all together. Let's take the brush again. And let's move down to the lips a little bit. So one of the things that I find that people do is they don't make the lip kind of go in. Right now it's too wet, but the thing to remind yourself is that the lower lip is divided into two. So right in the middle, there's going to be a depression that most likely you're not going to be able to see unless you have a mirror. Some people might be a little bit more prominent than others. And then the upper lip is divided into three. So there's this middle part, this nodule, this node. And then I'll create a little bit of a depression on that. And I'll take this tool and kind of just push it in on this side. And right here we have the kind of like the meaty part of the eye. Kind of goes up, and then this starts to be where the zygomatic bone and the cheekbone are.